All right, continuing our conversation this morning on what we see happening with regard to the protests, what happened in Nashville, and what happened across the country. Metro Vice Mayor Jim Shulman will be back with us tomorrow. He's going to get a lot more information between now and then to update us and take your questions and comments. Joining us now with another perspective on this is Representative Rick Staples. He is the Vice Chair of the Black Caucus in the Tennessee Legislature. Good morning to you, Representative Staples. Can you hear me all right?
Good. I can hear you just fine. Good morning. Thanks for having me on. And great comments by Vice Mayor Shulman. That's a great family. He and his brother are really stand-up guys.
Thank you. Are you here in town right now, sir? Are you at the legislature?
I am not. I am still in Knox County.
Oh, okay.
And I will be making my way to Nashville. Of course, I had to come home and direct and talk to my children about what's going on.
Absolutely. Well, tell me if you would. That's a good segue into what have you been telling them and in your observations from your perspective with regard to what we saw, not just nationally, of course, but what we saw in Nashville and yesterday in Murfreesboro. And I'm not sure if there was some unrest in Knoxville as well, sir.
There was some peaceful protest in Knoxville, but it's a very difficult thing. I got called the N-word when I was 6 years old going into a restaurant on Magnolia Avenue. And my father had to use his snub-nosed revolver in order to run those racists off. And they took my innocence that day because my parents had to explain to me how somebody will use words to hurt me because of the color of my skin. I'm 6 years old. Here it is, 2020, and I have to explain to my 6-year-old son why people will treat him the same way and why he sees so much violence and unrest taking place on television. And that shouldn't be the case. African Americans have been vilified since Reconstruction. You can say Emmett Till, you can say Trayvon Martin. If you kneel, you are vilified. If you protest, you are vilified. Wholesale murder of African Americans, be it they're exercising their right or just existing, is not okay.
And we understand much of the anger over what we see happening is at the root of these protests and then the violence that comes after. Give me your perspective. I mean, there's no question the idea of peaceful protest is a hallmark of American democracy, important to get out voices heard. How much does it pain you one way or the other when you see the vandalism, the looting, and that type of thing happening that a lot of people will say, look, just takes away from the message that we're trying to get to the heart of here?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, speak about why they're protesting. If you ask me about pain, I'll allude back to my story I just shared with you. I've been dealing with subconscious pain since someone decided to call me a nigger when I was 6 years old. So having to explain it to my children is pain within itself, and that's my own story. But if across this country for decades now, especially in recent history, from Texas to Georgia to Florida to California, now Minnesota, to Maryland, blacks dying or being abused or having law enforcement called on them just for having barbecues, that's the real issue that we need to address, not only from local administrations and state administrations, but legislative branch as well. We need to adjust some policies and laws. We need action steps. Conversations are okay if the conversations are built around actual action steps to make change.
So where do you think we go moving forward right now? We have these protests. I certainly don't think we've seen the last of them. At what point, I mean, do you believe that something substantive like what you're discussing is going to take place? I mean, are these protests, the riots, and unfortunately the ones that turn violent, you believe will get the attention and lead to change?
Well, change should be happening now. As we're talking right now, on the news, there should be meetings taking place with law enforcement and African Americans. There should be conversations with black and white legislators to remove symbols of hate, to remove policies that hurt, to adjust the criminal justice system that has gone against African Americans for decades, primarily in this state. And if we're going to change this theme of hatred across this country, coming out of a devastating pandemic that's already affecting us economically, and now we have this resurfacing, lines of hatred and disregard for people in their lives because of the color of their skin. These conversations should have been happening, but we have to move now, right now, and move within the sphere of your influence, move within your own purview at whatever level that you have power and influence. It needs to be happening today. It's my hope that when I arrive at the legislature today, that the leadership from the administration to the legislative branch will start taking action and having conversations. The other day, the governor said that he spoke with black leaders and black faith leaders. There are 17 black leaders that were right next door to him that I don't know he talked to any of them. So hopefully those conversations will take place today.
Do you believe then, moving forward, that the violence that sometimes now is associated with some of these rallies helps or hurts the cause?
Violence begat the rallies. I will not have a conversation about violence at rallies until you speak about the violence that caused the rallies. We're talking about violence that goes back for decades within the lives of African Americans. Words of violence, abuse is violence. If I cannot jog down the street without being murdered, speak to what caused the riots. Speak to what caused the rallies. Do you want me to kneel, but you'll still vilify me? You will not speak to me even if I kneel. So if I gather in protest of what you're doing to people that look like me, you just want to focus on my gathering, not the cause of my gathering, which the causes are draped in blood. That's my stance on that.
Do you believe now then, when you get with your fellow lawmakers here then, that they're in a position, and the governor, are you hopeful then will be able to discuss, I don't know if you're talking about laws, are we talking about different types of training for law enforcement officers? Can you give me some specifics?
So first and foremost, we are lawmakers. We set policy, we set law. We need to review if it's laws or legislation that needs to take place to look at what levels of hate crimes are we talking about? Who can perpetrate a hate crime? Are African Americans protected when they're engaging with law enforcement? And for years, if you think about just certain facts that you and the media already know, Knox County and Shelby County are listed nationally in poverty. We lead the state of Tennessee in poverty. So if you're looking at people who are dealing with disinvestment, being struck by economic downturns, even when the state was doing well, what type of investments have we made from the state level to make sure that African Americans have a right and freedom to life and peace and be able to function?
Is it, and what we're dealing with here, and I don't know, is a trend. Do you believe there had been strides, and would you say over, I don't know what time span you want to give it, over the past decade, had there been strides and you think steps have been taken backward in recent years? Where do we stand? Has it gotten a bit better and then stepped back, or has it just been too slow to move forward, period?
There obviously has been strides. The fact that I crossed the threshold of the Capitol House building shows that. It shows that we have women in leadership. So there has been strides, but unfortunately, with these strides, we have chosen to sweep under the rug conversations, uncomfortable conversations that we should have had. Oftentimes, we've allowed for partisanship to get involved in policies and changes that we should make at the state and local level. And unfortunately, at the national level, it doesn't appear to be any type of leadership that is looking to quell these issues, but only to incite more violence.
Representative Staples, I get the sense that you, I don't know if you thought it would come now, but you saw this coming to this degree after clearly just within the past 2-3 weeks, 1, 2, 3 incidents across the country that really, led to outrage. Did you see it coming? Did you think it would come sooner, or what we're in right now?
We were at a boiling point. I mean, once again, going back to Trayvon Martin and a lack of justice there. And then these are things that are just being caught on camera. So if you see one incident being caught on video, there are several incidents, and these incidences are taking place across the state. Not only from law enforcement, but obviously looking at Georgia, from individuals, to where people cannot enjoy themselves that are Black, even cooking out without having authorities called on them. So there's a mindset running across this country that we were aware of, but we chose not to address. But it came out against me when I addressed removing the Nathan Bedford Forrest bus just because of what it symbolizes to African Americans and threats and the negativity that came just from that. There's just certain areas and pockets of our country that do not want to move forward, and it's up to us as leaders in the state legislature to make sure that we're making movements and moving in a progressive manner to correct these things, because the blood and the violence is in our face now. We can no longer ignore it.
Representative, we have to take a quick break. We'll come back, our second segment with you. We may take some comments off Facebook as well as some phone calls, if you don't mind. Just stand by. We'll be right back with Representative Staples right after this. Stay with us.